My name's Tim, if you don't know. I've been here a few times now. Obviously, I know Stephen through working at Everton Free School, and Stephen is the chaplain there. So it's really nice to be here and to help and serve. So I wanted to carry on, well, sort of move with it being Easter this month. I wanted to sort of carry on with looking what happened after Easter. I'll go back with so the title of the talk is On the Road to Emmaus. This is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. I probably need to go a bit slower, don't I, without translation or the interpreter. So yeah, this is the road to Emmaus, on the road to Emmaus. I'll read the story first. That same day, two of Jesus' followers were walking to the village of Emmaus, 7 miles from Jerusalem. As they walked along, they were talking about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things, Jesus himself suddenly came and began walking with them, but God kept them from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing so intently as you walk along?" They stopped short, sadness written across their faces. Then one of them, Cleopas, replied, "You must be the only person in Jerusalem who hasn't heard about all the things that have happened there the last few days." "What things?" Jesus asked. "The things that happened to Jesus, the man from Nazareth," they said. "He was a prophet who did powerful miracles, and he was a mighty teacher in the eyes of God and all the people. But our leading priests and other religious leaders handed him over to be condemned to death, and they crucified him. We had hoped he was the Messiah who had come to rescue Israel. This all happened 3 days ago." Then some women from our group of his followers were at his tomb early this morning, and they came back with an amazing report. They said his body was missing, and they had seen angels who told them Jesus is alive. Some of our men ran out to see, and sure enough, his body was gone, just as the women had said. Then Jesus said to them, "You foolish people, you find it so hard to believe all that the prophets wrote in the scriptures. Wasn't it clearly predicted that the Messiah would have to suffer all these things before entering his glory?" Then Jesus took them through the writings of Moses and all the prophets, explaining from all the scriptures the things concerning himself. By this time, they were nearing Emmaus and the end of the journey. Jesus acted as if he was going on, but they begged him to stay the night with us. They said, "Stay the night with us, since it is getting late." So he went home with them. As they sat down to eat, he broke the bread and blessed it. Then he broke it and gave it to them. Suddenly their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and at that moment he disappeared. They said to each other, "Didn't our hearts burn within us as he talked with us on the road and explained the scriptures to us?" And within the hour, they were on their way back to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 disciples and the others who had gathered with them, who said, "The Lord has really risen." He appeared to Peter. So that was Luke 24, verse 13 to 34. I'm just going to break down this story and just share what I feel like God has put on my heart to share with you. Here they are in the picture, walking with, well, Jesus has appeared to them. However, before this picture, they had been pretty sad. the two disciples had been discussing what had happened with Jesus in Jerusalem over those past 3 days. And they were on their way back to their house, to their home. And I think you can get from the story that they were pretty upset. Jesus had died. I mean, that's the ultimate sort of plan for them had been completely ended. Jesus had died. And they were walking away just confused as to what they thought was going to happen and what actually happened. And even when Jesus joined them, God obviously kept them from recognizing who this extra person was walking with them. Obviously, we know it's Jesus, but they couldn't see that or didn't realize that. And Jesus asked them the question, so what are you discussing? And they told him what had happened, and they were obviously upset because they said that they thought that Jesus was going to be the Messiah who had come to rescue Israel. So they were disappointed and they were sad. And things hadn't worked out the way that they wanted it to. And with Jesus asking that question, as I was thinking about it, I wondered if one of the disciples, was it Cleopas? I think he was quite surprised at Jesus's question. In fact, I wondered if they might be angry or even annoyed with someone asking such an obvious question. What do you mean you don't know? You must be the only person who's not heard what's been going on in Israel or in Jerusalem, sorry. I know that I would probably been a bit annoyed, especially if I was upset. Obviously, we don't know exactly how they responded, but I think for me, I would have been a bit annoyed. What are you saying? You don't know. I'd put my life on the line for this man. These guys have given up everything to follow Jesus. And then he's asking them, so how's it going? Everybody all right? And they're like, haven't you heard? And these guys have put their lives on the line to follow Jesus, given up everything, especially those people like Peter and James. They've given up the fishing, their business, to follow Jesus as their Messiah. And then he's died. What we do definitely know, I wasn't there. I'm not a massive sort of, historian, but we know that they were in a negative space. They weren't in a good place, were they? And Jesus was just beginning to ask questions. But obviously, in the bigger picture, what we do know now in hindsight is that Jesus was walking with them. And that's the biggest thing, isn't it? That Jesus Christ was walking with them through their disappointment, through their anger, through their annoyance and sadness. Jesus was actually there. They might not have recognized him, but maybe that's why we have the hindsight to help us. And then Jesus does this, this thing he's done all the way through his ministry on earth, where he says to them, "Oh, you foolish people." Now, I'm an Englishman, and we're not always that blunt with people, are we? You probably realise that, guys who have come from other nations. We're not always that blunt. But Jesus was caring and loving, but he was also straight with them. And he just said, listen, he challenged them. You find it so hard to believe. And they're like, what? Why are you having a go at us? Why are you cross with us? But within the challenge, there is a purpose. The reason for the challenge is to turn their hearts, isn't it? The only thing is they don't know that Jesus is alive. They're still confused. And I expect once they realise that, they wouldn't have cared. If they'd have known it was Jesus, they wouldn't have cared really, would they, if he'd have challenged them or not? But they didn't know. But they put up with his challenge. And he said, this is what he says. Jesus said to them, "You foolish people, you find it so hard to believe all that the prophets wrote in the scriptures." I mean, that's the first clue that it's actually Jesus. Because he'd been saying it to the Pharisees, he'd been saying it to his disciples when they were asking him, after feeding the 5,000, they say, "Oh, we haven't got any bread here," when they're going across in the storm after Jesus had fed all those people. And he says, "Oh, you still don't believe, And again, he's sort of saying, "Come on, guys. You're finding it so hard to believe." But God, in his graciousness and in his kindness and in his love, he then points the disciples to the scriptures and explains exactly what they meant about himself. He took them back through the scriptures and reminded them, explaining from all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So, yeah, he challenged them, but he also just reminded them in his kindness. As a teacher, I'm not always the most patient. I'm certainly not as patient as Jesus was. Yeah. But as a teacher in my school, you have to remember to give the students one example, then practice it again to help them to understand, and then maybe give them a third or a fourth example or repeat of the question and answer to help them to actually understand what's going on. And Jesus was the best teacher. And yet again, he's given them another chance to understand and to realize that they hadn't quite understood. But he turned their eyes back onto him and helped them to see the reality of God's plan, of what had been planned all along. So there was misunderstanding. Sorry, this should have been up earlier. But there was misunderstanding. The disciples hadn't quite understood what Jesus had come for, because they were saying they thought it was going to be a physical rescue. They thought the Messiah was going to physically change the politics of Israel. They thought the Messiah, Jesus, was going to rescue them from the Romans and their invasion. The disciples, well, not all the disciples, but these two specifically thought Jesus was going to do something physical, change everything as the Messiah. But that wasn't God's plan. That wasn't the first plan. That wasn't why Jesus had come. It was going to be a spiritual change. And I think that's why Jesus took them through the scriptures to help them re-see what God's plan really was. So Jesus had been walking with them through their confusion. Remember that. So he's walking with them through their sadness. He's staying with them through their anger and annoyance and disappointment. And then he's staying with them and walking with them in their misunderstandings and confusion. He's pointed them to the scriptures. He shows them again, doesn't he? What I've just said. He pointed the scriptures about them, helped them to understand what God was really doing. And he turns their eyes to look at him. And he's staying with them through all that. But then again, he acts as if he's moving forwards. He's not staying with them. So the disciples obviously come to Emmaus. Cleopas is getting close to his house, like the picture. Obviously, probably not exactly like that. And they said, well, we're going to go back to our house, get some food, have a sleep after this really stressful 3 days in Jerusalem. And Jesus is acting again like he's not going to, he's going to carry on. And I think maybe what Jesus wanted was for them to actually reach out to him. Not just say, "Oh, well, see you then." I think what Jesus wanted was a response from them. Doesn't want us just to be, "Well, it's just Jesus, isn't it?" That's what it is. I think what he wants us to do is to respond and connect with him, meet him halfway almost. Obviously, he's done everything. But I think he's wanting to look for a bit of a faith, something of faith, a response from us, a showing that actually, no, hold on, Jesus, this stuff that you're talking about means more to me than just, well, that's interesting knowledge in my head. You know, we are in an information age where everything is at our fingertips. We can know everything instantly, have everything now. But Jesus, obviously, they didn't have phones then, but Jesus wants a response from us. He doesn't just want us to sit on our phones on the seat. He wants us to go with him, to make a movement towards him, to urge him to stay with us. And he responded, and he stays with them at their home, doesn't he? And he cares with us so much that he is going to go with us through all the tough times and the good times. He's going to be at home with us. He is in our hearts, obviously, but he's going to come with us to our home and be with us in the good times and the bad times. And then obviously this is the best bit, isn't it? One of my favorite bits. So as they sat down to eat in one of the disciples' houses, he took the bread and blessed it. Then he broke it and gave it to them. Suddenly their eyes were opened and they recognized him. And then at that moment, he disappeared. So he's walked with them through the journey, the disappointment, the negativity, their confusion, their anger at God and the situation. It's not gone the way they thought. But this guy is an interesting guy, and they say, no, come on, stay with us. There's something about you. Then and look what Jesus does. He just reminds the disciples, doesn't he, what he said for them to do. You know, just before he died, he said, do this in remembrance of me. And while they're eating, Jesus takes the bread and the wines in the pitcher, and he breaks the bread, and suddenly their eyes are open. Every time Jesus is trying to get them to look in faith. Okay, he hasn't even showed them his hands, has he? Whether they noticed it or not, I don't know, but he hasn't even showed them his hands like he does Thomas. He's tried to get them to look with their eyes of faith and with their spiritual eyes, not just a physical example. Jesus is trying to sort of get them to walk by the Spirit, to walk in faith first. And maybe that's what maybe they did as they were breaking bread, but maybe they were like, oh yeah, Jesus asked us to do, oh, hold on a minute, it's Jesus. But every time in this story, Jesus is trying to get his disciples to act in faith, to remember what he said, to do what he's saying. And then just as they see, just even before he hasn't showed them his hands, he disappears because they've got it. They realize this is Jesus. And not just through physically showing them stuff, but because suddenly I believe their faith is activated and they're trusting him again. Hopefully with their eyes changed, because actually, Jesus wasn't going to do a massive physical change in Jerusalem and Israel. He was talking about spiritual change in our hearts and spiritual, a new realm in the spirit for us. And finally their eyes are open and suddenly everything makes sense. Didn't our hearts burn within us? Something was going on that walk home, a fantastic walk home, one of the best walk homes I think you're going to see. And their hearts burn within them, and then suddenly they realize why. And they rush back to Jerusalem. Is it back to Jerusalem, I think? Or he goes back, back to Jerusalem. I guess you would if you've just seen Jesus raised from the dead again, physically, or realize. They go back where they came, and they're telling the disciples, and we've seen Jesus too. But what I want you to take from this morning are these key points that Jesus walks with us through our disappointment, our confusion, our anger. It's okay to be angry. As long as you don't stay in that place. It's okay to be angry with God, but don't stay in that place. Talk to people about it. Get it off your chest. And then let Jesus point you back in the way of faith. Because that's what Jesus did for these disciples. He pointed them to what he'd said. They pointed them to himself. He pointed them in their disappointment to what God was really doing, which was much bigger than just a man in Jerusalem. Obviously, Jesus is God, but it was going to save the whole world. And maybe that's what blew their minds as well, that they saw that it wasn't just a physical thing, but it was a thing of the heart, that Jesus wanted to save their hearts, change their hearts. And it was going to be a spiritual thing first. Jesus walks with us and helps us and shows us the way. And I think he just wants us to trust him again. I need to trust him. So I hope you can take something from that.